The air inside the massive negotiation hall felt heavy with tension. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the polished metal table, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the alien beings across from him. 6 months of talks had led to this moment, and he could feel the weight of humanity's future pressing down on his shoulders. The hall itself was a marvel of alien engineering, built on Harmony Prime, a neutral space station that orbited between 3 different star systems. The walls curved upward into a dome that showed the stars beyond, creating an illusion of floating in space. Soft blue lights emanated from panels in the floor, casting strange shadows on the faces of both human and alien delegates. Across the table sat the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Prime Minister Zekthanor of the Veltar Empire dominated the center position. His crystalline body caught and reflected the blue light, creating patterns that danced across the table's surface. Each movement he made produced soft chiming sounds like wind through crystal bells. His species had controlled the galactic trade routes for over 1,000 years. To his right sat Hive Queen Lixandra of the Cathara Collective. Her insectoid form was both beautiful and terrifying, with 6 arms that moved independently and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The chittering sounds she made when communicating with her own kind reminded Morrison of summer nights on Earth, but he knew better than to find comfort in the familiar sound. On the left floated Ambassador Wispatel of the Etherian Commonwealth. His gaseous form shifted constantly within a containment field, changing colors from pale blue to deep purple as his emotions fluctuated. When he spoke, the sound came from speakers built into his floating platform, translating his electromagnetic communications into words the others could understand. Morrison had studied each of these species for years, learning their languages, their customs, their histories. He knew that the Veltar valued order and hierarchy above all else. The Cathara believed in collective decision-making and saw individual desires as selfish. The Etherians prided themselves on logic and viewed emotion as a weakness. Understanding them had been crucial to the negotiations, but it had also shown him just how different humanity was from the rest of the galaxy. Behind Morrison stood his small team of advisors. Lieutenant Kelly Brooks served as his aide and translator. Her knowledge of alien languages surpassed only by her ability to read the subtle signs of negotiation. Dr. Robert Hayes specialized in xenobiology and had spent decades studying alien psychology. Commander Pete Wilson handled military intelligence and kept track of every ship movement in the surrounding systems. The negotiations had started with such promise. Earth had made first contact with the Galactic Council 3 years ago, when one of their scout ships had encountered a human exploration vessel near Alpha Centauri. The meeting had been peaceful, even friendly. The aliens had seemed impressed by human technology and curious about their culture, but as the months passed, it became clear that the Council saw humanity very differently than humans saw themselves. To them, Earth was just another primitive world that needed guidance and protection. They had dealt with hundreds of species over the millennia, and they had a system for integrating new civilizations into their galactic community. The problem was that their system assumed humans would be grateful for the opportunity to join. It assumed they would gladly give up their independence in exchange for safety and security. It assumed they would accept the role of junior partners in a galaxy run by older, wiser species. Morrison had tried to explain that humans were different. They had fought wars among themselves for thousands of years, not because they were violent by nature, but because they valued freedom above almost everything else. They had explored their solar system not because they were told to, but because they were curious about what lay beyond their homeworld. They had developed faster-than-light travel not by following alien blueprints, but by solving the problems themselves through trial and error. But the Council representatives had listened to these explanations with the patience of adults humoring a child. They nodded and smiled and then continued with their predetermined agenda. Prime Minister Zekthanor cleared his throat, a sound like crystals rubbing together. Captain Morrison, we have been most patient with your requests, but the time for discussion has ended. The Council has made its final offer. Morrison remained standing as Zekthanor activated a holographic display above the table. The 3-dimensional image showed a map of human space, with Earth at the center and various colonies marked in red. Under the Protection Accords, Zekthanor continued, humanity will be granted protected species status within the Galactic Council. Your military vessels will be decommissioned and replaced with Council patrol ships, staffed by experienced personnel. Your population will be relocated to suitable worlds where proper infrastructure can be established. Your genetic development will be monitored to ensure healthy evolution. The words hit Morrison like physical blows. Decommissioned military vessels meant the end of human independence. Relocation meant the breakup of Earth's population. Genetic monitoring meant treating humans like laboratory animals. Lieutenant Brooks shifted nervously beside him, her hand moving unconsciously toward the communication device on her belt. Morrison knew she was thinking about Admiral Carter, waiting aboard the flagship Constitution just outside the system. The Admiral had made it clear that he would support whatever decision Morrison made. But Morrison also knew that Carter was hoping for a different outcome than the one being offered. Hive Queen Lixandra leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. The Council understands that change can be difficult for young species. But consider the benefits. No more war, no more hunger, no more uncertainty about the future. Your children will grow up in a galaxy where their safety is guaranteed. Ambassador Wispatel's gaseous form rippled with what Morrison had learned to recognize as enthusiasm. Your species shows remarkable potential, Captain. With proper guidance, humans could become valuable contributors to galactic civilization, but only if you accept the wisdom of those who have walked this path before you. Morrison looked at each of them in turn, seeing the genuine belief in their expressions. They truly thought they were offering humanity a gift. They could not understand why anyone would refuse such generosity. And if we decline this offer? Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. Zekthanor's crystalline form dimmed slightly. Then humanity will remain classified as an unprotected species. The Council cannot guarantee your safety from the various threats that exist in this galaxy. Pirates, rogue AI systems, aggressive species from the Outer Rim. Your little fleet would not survive a year without Council protection. The threat was clear, even though it was delivered with polite concern. Accept protection or face destruction. Morrison turned to his team, seeing the same resolve in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had known this moment would come. They had prepared for it. Lieutenant Brooks, he said quietly, send word to Admiral Carter. Tell him the negotiations have concluded. He turned back to the Council representatives, straightening his shoulders. Prime Minister Zekthanor, Hive Queen Lixandra, Ambassador Wispatel, I want to thank you for your time and consideration. However, humanity must respectfully decline your generous offer. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the soft humming of the station's life support system seemed to pause. Wispatel was the first to recover, his gaseous form swirling rapidly. Captain, perhaps you misunderstood the terms. This is not a negotiation. This is the Council's final decision regarding your species. Morrison smiled, and somehow that expression made all three aliens lean back slightly. I understood perfectly, Ambassador, and humanity's final decision is no. He gathered his papers and nodded to his team. As they prepared to leave, Zekthanor called out, Captain Morrison, you are making a grave mistake. Your species is not ready for the dangers of galactic civilization. Morrison paused at the doorway and looked back. That's where you're wrong, Prime Minister. We've been ready for this moment longer than you know. As the human delegation left the hall, the three most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. In over 1,000 years of expansion and integration, no species had ever simply walked away from Council protection. They were about to learn that humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered. 3 days after Captain Morrison walked away from the Galactic Council, Admiral Patricia Hayes stood before a massive holographic display in the deepest levels of Luna Base. The underground command center had been carved from solid rock over 50 years ago, its existence known only to the highest levels of Earth's military command. The room hummed with quiet energy as dozens of officers worked at their stations, their faces lit by the blue glow of their screens. Admiral Hayes had gray hair that she kept pulled back in a regulation bun, and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent making difficult decisions. She had commanded Earth's deep space forces for 15 years, but today felt different from any other day in her career. Today, humanity would reveal secrets that had been carefully guarded for half a century. Dr. Vincent Cole stood beside her, adjusting his glasses as he studied the holographic star map floating above the central table. As Earth's chief xenobiologist, he had spent more time studying alien species than almost any other human alive. His research had been crucial in developing the strategies that were about to unfold. General Paul Wright occupied the opposite side of the display, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The commander of Earth's ground forces had fought in 3 different colonial wars and understood better than anyone what humanity was capable of when pushed to its limits. Around the room, other key figures watched and waited. Commander Lisa Park from the Tactical Division monitored incoming reports from across human space. Colonel Steve Martinez tracked alien fleet movements through the intelligence network. Captain Jenny Foster coordinated communications with the hidden fleets that were even now preparing to emerge from the darkness. Between stars, the holographic display showed what appeared to be a simple map of known human territory. Earth sat at the center, surrounded by a handful of colonies that the Galactic Council believed represented the extent of human expansion. Mars, Europa, Titan, and a few systems within 20 light-years of Sol. To any alien observer, it looked like a small and vulnerable civilization that had barely begun to explore its local region of space. Admiral Hayes activated a new layer of the display with a gesture, and suddenly the map exploded with new information. Red dots appeared throughout the galaxy's outer rim, each one representing a human settlement that the Council had never detected. There were hundreds of them, scattered across thousands of light-years, each one carefully hidden and completely self-sufficient. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Hayes began, her voice carrying clearly through the command center. "For 50 years, while the Council believed we were struggling to master basic faster-than-light travel, we have been building a civilization they never imagined." Dr. Cole stepped forward and highlighted one section of the display. Operation Deep Seed began in 1975, just 3 years after we achieved our first successful FTL jump. While we were publicly celebrating our ability to reach Alpha Centauri, we were secretly launching colony ships to the most remote regions of the galaxy. The genius of the plan became clear as Dr. Cole explained the details. Each colony had been established in systems that appeared worthless to the major galactic powers. Dead worlds that required extensive terraforming, asteroid fields that seemed too dangerous to mine, gas giants with unusual radiation signatures that made most aliens avoid them entirely. But humans had turned these apparent disadvantages into strengths. The dead worlds became thriving agricultural centers once Earth's terraforming technology transformed their atmospheres. The dangerous asteroid fields became massive mining operations protected by natural hazards that kept alien ships away. The irradiated gas giants provided perfect cover for orbital installations that could remain hidden for decades. General Wright activated another section of the display, showing the military aspects of humanity's hidden expansion. Each settlement was established with complete industrial capacity from day one. They weren't just colonies. They were fully independent manufacturing centers capable of building everything from farming, equipment to military vessels, Commander. Park pulled up detailed schematics of human military technology that made several officers in the room whistle with appreciation. The ships shown on the display looked nothing like the crude vessels that humanity had publicly demonstrated to the Council. These were sleek, deadly machines incorporating 50 years of continuous improvement and innovation. Project Ghost Fleet became operational 15 years ago, Park explained. 500 dreadnoughts, each one equipped with plasma lance technology that can punch through any known alien armor. Quantum shields that can deflect energy weapons the Council considers state-of-the-art. Stealth systems that make our ships invisible to their sensors. The most impressive part was how the fleet had remained hidden. Each ship had been constructed in the orbital shipyards around the hidden colonies, using materials mined from the asteroid fields and powered by fusion reactors that produced no detectable signatures when running in standby mode. For years, they had drifted in the empty space between star systems, waiting for orders that everyone hoped would never come. Admiral Hayes gestured to Captain Foster, who brought up the intelligence reports that had made all of this preparation possible. "Our spy networks have been monitoring Council communications for 30 years. We know their fleet positions, their supply routes, their military protocols, and most importantly, their weaknesses." The intelligence operation had been almost as impressive as the military buildup. Human agents had infiltrated alien societies across the galaxy, posing as traders, diplomats, and researchers. They had learned alien languages, studied alien technology, and reported back on everything from military capabilities to cultural blind spots that could be exploited in a conflict. Dr. Cole highlighted specific examples of what they had learned. The Veltar Empire relies entirely on rigid command structures that collapse if you eliminate key leadership nodes. The Cathera Collective uses bioships that are vulnerable to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. The Etherian Commonwealth has never fought a war against an enemy that uses kinetic weapons instead of energy-based attacks. What made the intelligence even more valuable was that the aliens had no idea they were being watched. The Council species had grown so accustomed to their technological superiority that they had never developed effective counterintelligence measures. They shared information freely, assuming that no primitive species could possibly understand or use it against them. Colonel Martinez brought up the communication intercepts that had been captured in the days since the negotiations collapsed. The Council is mobilizing 3 major fleets to deal with what they call the human problem. Fleet Admiral Korthak is bringing 200 Veltar battlecruisers from the core worlds. Hive Queen Lixandra has dispatched 500 bioships from the Collective's breeding worlds. The Etherian Commonwealth is sending their experimental energy warfare vessels to test their new weapons systems. Admiral Hayes studied the alien fleet, movements with the calm expression of someone who had expected exactly this response. They're following standard Council doctrine for dealing with unprotected species. Overwhelming force applied quickly to minimize casualties and demonstrate their superiority. General Wright smiled grimly. They have no idea that their standard doctrine was designed to work against species that fight the way they expect. Nobody has ever fought them the way we're about to fight them. The human military had spent decades studying how the Council dealt with resistant species. They had analyzed every recorded conflict, every tactical decision, every strategic assumption that guided alien military thinking. What they had discovered was that the Council had never faced an enemy that understood their methods better than they understood themselves. Commander Park activated the final display, showing the deployment orders that were even now being transmitted to human forces across the galaxy. All Ghost Fleet units are powering up and moving to attack positions. Our agents within Council space are preparing to sabotage key installations. Our colonies are shifting to wartime production. The scope of the operation was staggering. Across hundreds of star systems, human forces were emerging from hiding like a sleeping giant awakening. Ships that had drifted in darkness for years were coming online, their crews eager to finally put their training to use. Industrial centers that had masqueraded as peaceful settlements were revealing their true nature as military production facilities. Admiral Hayes looked around the command center at the faces of her officers. These were people who had dedicated their lives to preparing for a war they hoped would never come. They had kept humanity's greatest secret for decades, watching as the galaxy dismissed their species as young and naive. The Council offered us protection, she said quietly. They wanted to treat us like children who needed guidance and supervision. They never bothered to ask what we had been doing while they weren't watching. Dr. Cole nodded toward the display showing alien fleet movements. They're about to discover that the children they wanted to protect have grown up to become something they never expected. The command center fell silent as everyone contemplated what was about to unfold. For 50 years, humanity had prepared for this moment. They had built fleets in secret, established. Prime Minister Zekathanor stood in the center of the Council's emergency chamber on Galactic Prime, his crystalline body flickering with patterns of light that betrayed his growing agitation. The massive dome-shaped room had been designed to inspire awe and confidence, with its walls made of transparent aluminum that offered a view of the sprawling capital city below. Today, however, the usual sense of order and control had been replaced by something the Council had not experienced in centuries: genuine fear. Emergency alerts flooded the chamber's communication systems, creating a cacophony of sounds that would have been overwhelming to most species. The Veltar delegation clustered around their leader, their crystal forms chiming with harmonics that expressed confusion and alarm. Across the chamber, representatives from the Cathera Collective chittered anxiously as they tried to process the flood of incoming reports. Fleet Admiral Korthak materialized in the center of the room as a full-sized hologram, his usually perfect military bearing showing signs of strain. The veteran commander had served the Veltar Empire for over 2 centuries and had never experienced anything like what he was reporting. Prime Minister, Korthak began, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. We have lost contact with 17 monitoring stations along what we believe to be the border of human space. Additionally, our deep space sensor networks are detecting massive energy signatures from sectors we classified as empty and uninhabitable. Hive Queen Lixandra moved forward on her 6 legs, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded them. Her translated voice carried an edge of concern that was rare among her species. Admiral, please provide specific numbers. How many vessels are we detecting? Kjorthak's holographic form gestured toward a tactical display that appeared above the chamber floor. The 3-dimensional map showed the galaxy's outer rim, with red dots appearing in locations that should have been devoid of any significant civilization. Conservative estimates suggest we are detecting over 400 vessels, each one outputting energy signatures comparable to our largest battlecruisers, the Admiral reported. But distinguished council members, there is more. Our intelligence division has been analyzing these signatures and has made a disturbing discovery. The map zoomed in on several sectors that had been marked as uninhabitable wastelands in council surveys. As the view focused, the red dots resolved into detailed tactical information that made the assembled delegates fall silent with shock. These are not crude vessels hastily assembled for war, Kjorthak continued. These are sophisticated warships that show design principles we have never encountered. Their hulls appear to be constructed from materials that absorb our sensor sweeps. Their power signatures suggest fusion reactors operating at efficiency levels that exceed our own technology. Ambassador Wispatel's gaseous form began swirling more rapidly, a clear sign of extreme agitation among his species. The Etherian Commonwealth prided itself on technological superiority, and the idea that a primitive species could have developed advanced technology in secret was almost impossible for him to accept. This cannot be accurate, Wispatel declared. His electromagnetic voice translated through speakers around the chamber. Our surveys of human space were thorough. We cataloged every major installation, every significant energy source, every population center. They possess barely functional faster-than-light drives and primitive fusion technology. The chamber's main communication screen suddenly activated without authorization, causing security systems throughout the building to sound alarms. The image that appeared showed a human woman in military uniform, her gray hair and confident expression suggesting both experience and authority. Members of the Galactic Council, the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's audio systems. I am Admiral Patricia Hayes of the United Earth Space Command. I believe you wish to discuss the current situation. The breach of Council security was unprecedented. The chamber was protected by the most advanced encryption and defensive systems in the galaxy. Yet this human had accessed their communications as easily as if she were walking through an open door. Prime Minister Zek Thanor struggled to maintain his composure as he addressed the unexpected visitor. Admiral Hayes, this intrusion into Council space is a violation of galactic law. Your captain was offered reasonable terms for your species' integration into our civilization. Admiral Hayes smiled, and somehow that simple human expression managed to convey both diplomacy and threat in equal measure. Prime Minister, integration was never truly on the table. Subjugation was the only option you offered. We respectfully decline. The human's words hit the chamber like a physical force. In over 1,000 years of expansion and contact with primitive species, no civilization had ever rejected Council protection. The very idea was contrary to everything they understood about how galactic politics worked. Hive Queen Lixandra leaned forward, her multiple arms gesturing in patterns that expressed confusion. Admiral, you cannot comprehend the dangers that exist in this galaxy. Without Council protection, your species will face threats that you are not equipped to handle. Pirate fleets, rogue artificial intelligence systems, aggressive species from the galactic rim. Your concern is noted, Admiral Hayes replied, her tone remaining pleasantly conversational. However, we believe you may have underestimated our capabilities. Fleet Admiral Kjorthak stepped forward in his holographic form. Admiral Hayes, our intelligence reports indicate that humanity possesses fewer than 50 military vessels of any significant capability. Your largest ships are barely the size of our escort frigates. The human admiral's smile widened slightly. Admiral Kjorthak, your intelligence reports are based on what we chose to show you. For 50 years, while you believed we were struggling to master basic space travel, we have been preparing for exactly this conversation. Another display activated in the chamber, this one showing a detailed breakdown of what Council forces had detected in the past 72 hours. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of human installations in sectors that had been surveyed as empty. Energy signatures indicating industrial capacity that rivaled major Council worlds. And ship movements that suggested a level of organization that should have taken centuries to develop. Ambassador Wispatel's form flickered with colors that indicated deep skepticism. These readings must be sensor errors or some form of technological deception. No species develops such capabilities without Council knowledge and approval. Ambassador, Admiral Hayes replied, that assumption has been the source of your miscalculation. You believed that because you had not observed our development, it was not occurring. You assumed that because we appeared primitive, we were primitive. You thought that because we seemed isolated, we were weak. Prime Minister Zekthanor's crystalline form dimmed as the implications began to sink in. Admiral, surely you understand that conflict benefits no one. The Council has maintained galactic peace for over 3 centuries through cooperation and mutual benefit. Peace through submission is not peace, Prime Minister. Admiral Hayes responded. It is simply organized surrender. Humanity has studied your methods for decades. We know how you deal with species that refuse your protection. The chamber fell silent as the Council members realized that their standard approach to resistant civilizations had been anticipated and planned for. Every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine, every assumption they held about how to handle primitive species had apparently been studied and countered. Fleet. Admiral Korthak brought up tactical displays, showing the movement of Council forces toward human space. Admiral Hayes, 3 major fleets are currently en route to your territory. Fleet compositions include 200 Veltar battlecruisers, 500 Cathara bioships, and 50 Etherian energy warfare vessels. Surely you cannot believe your hidden fleet can stand against such overwhelming force. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical information for a moment before responding. Admiral, your fleets are following standard Council doctrine for dealing with unprotected species. Massive overwhelming force applied quickly to demonstrate superiority and minimize resistance. Exactly, Korthak replied with confidence. This approach has proven effective against every resistant species we have encountered. Yes, Admiral Hayes agreed. And that predictability has been your weakness. You have never faced an enemy that studied your methods and prepared specifically to counter them. The human admiral gestured toward something off-screen, and new information began appearing on the Council's displays. Ship movements, energy signatures, and tactical deployments that showed human forces moving into positions that suggested they had anticipated exactly where and how the Council fleets would attack. You see, distinguished Council members, Admiral Hayes continued, while you were planning to deal with what you believed was a primitive and isolated species, we were planning to deal with you. We know your fleet compositions, your tactical doctrines, your supply routes, and most importantly, your weaknesses. Hive Queen Lixandra's compound eyes widened as she processed the tactical implications. You have been spying on us for decades, learning from you, Admiral Hayes corrected. Your species have achieved remarkable things over the millennia. We simply chose. Captain Danny Rivera stood on the bridge of the UESC Titan's Fury, watching through the main viewport as his fleet emerged from quantum slip space at the edge of the Cathara home system. The sight never failed to impress him, even after 15 years of commanding deep space vessels. One moment there was only empty space and distant stars, and the next moment, 50 human dreadnoughts materialized like ghosts becoming solid, their hulls gleaming with adaptive armor that shifted colors to match the surrounding darkness. The bridge around him hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew worked at their stations. These were men and women who had trained for this moment their entire careers, many of them born and raised in the hidden colonies that the Council never knew existed. They understood what was at stake better than anyone, because they had grown up knowing that someday they might have to fight for humanity's right to exist as a free species. Lieutenant Amy Foster turned from her communications console, her young face serious with concentration. Captain, we're receiving transmission from Admiral Carter aboard the Stellar Hammer. Rivera nodded toward the main screen. Put him through, Lieutenant. Admiral Carter's weathered face appeared on the display, and behind him Rivera could see the bridge of the flagship buzzing with controlled activity. Carter had been commanding Ghost Fleet operations for over a decade, and his experience showed in the calm confidence of his expression. "All ships. This is Admiral Carter," the fleet commander began, his voice carrying clearly through the communication system. "Today we send a message that will echo across the galaxy for centuries. Humanity will not kneel to those who demand our surrender." Rivera felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before combat as he looked around his bridge. Weapons Officer Carl Martinez was running final checks on the plasma lance arrays, his fingers dancing across control panels with practiced precision. Tactical Officer Sarah Phillips monitored the enemy fleet movements on her displays, tracking every ship in the Kythera formation. Engineering Chief Tom Wilson reported from the lower decks that all systems were operating at peak efficiency. The Kythera home system was a sight unlike anything else in the galaxy. 3 gas giant planets orbited a young blue star, each one surrounded by massive organic structures that served as shipyards and population centers for the insectoid species. The bioships that defended the system looked more grown than built, with curved hulls that resembled enormous beetles and weapon systems that had evolved rather than been designed. Rivera studied the enemy formation through his tactical display and smiled grimly. The Kythera were following exactly the same defensive pattern that human intelligence had predicted. Their bioships moved in swarm formations, relying on overwhelming numbers and their natural regenerative abilities to overwhelm any attacker. "Captain," Phillips called from her station, "enemy fleet is moving to intercept. I count 327 bioships in the main formation, with another 150 providing orbital defense around their breeding worlds." The size of the enemy fleet would have been intimidating to most species, but Rivera and his crew had spent years studying Kythera tactics. They knew that the aliens' greatest strength could also become their greatest weakness if approached correctly. "Weapons status, Martinez?" Rivera asked. "Plasma lance arrays charged and ready, sir," the weapons officer reported. "Quantum torpedoes loaded in all tubes. Point defense systems are online and tracking. All defensive shields are operating at full capacity." Rivera activated the fleet communication channel. "All ships, this is Captain Rivera. The enemy is deploying in formation Delta 7, exactly as our simulations predicted. Execute hammer strike protocol on my mark." The human fleet began to move, and the difference between their approach and traditional council tactics became immediately apparent. Instead of forming a solid battle line or attempting to match the enemy's numbers with their own, the human ships spread out into a complex 3-dimensional formation that made use of the system's asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies. The Kythera bioships responded predictably, swarming toward what they perceived as scattered and vulnerable targets. Their tactics had worked against every enemy they had faced for over 1,000 years, overwhelming individual ships before they could coordinate an effective defense. But the human ships were not scattered randomly. Each vessel was positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire while using natural cover to protect themselves from return attacks. When the enemy swarm reached the optimal range, Rivera gave the order that changed everything. "All ships, execute hammer strike now." The human fleet opened fire simultaneously, and the space between the two forces lit up with streams of superheated plasma that struck the bioships with devastating accuracy. The plasma lances had been designed specifically to counter organic armor, burning through the chitinous hulls of the Kythera vessels like hot knives through soft material. The quantum torpedoes followed immediately after, their exotic warheads designed to disrupt the biological processes that allowed the enemy ships to function. Where plasma lances created holes, quantum torpedoes created systemic failures that spread through entire vessels like a disease. The first wave of the Kythera assault simply disintegrated under the coordinated human attack. Ships that had been charging forward in perfect formation suddenly found themselves reduced to drifting organic debris, their crews killed before they could even understand what was happening to them. "Direct hits across the enemy formation," Phillips reported, her voice tight with excitement. "Estimated 60% casualties in their first wave." But Rivera knew that the Kythera would not be defeated so easily. Their bioships had evolved the ability to adapt to new threats, and already he could see the surviving vessels beginning to modify their approach. "Second wave incoming," Martinez announced. "They're spreading out their formation and rotating their hull armor to present fresh surfaces." "They learn fast," Rivera observed, "but not fast enough. All ships, switch to targeting pattern Omega. Focus fire on their command vessels. The human fleet adjusted their tactics smoothly, demonstrating the flexibility that had become their greatest advantage. While the Council species relied on rigid doctrines and predetermined responses, human commanders were trained to adapt and improvise in real time. The second engagement was more challenging than the first, as the Kythera had begun to counter the plasma lance attacks with rapid rotation patterns that distributed damage across their hulls. But the human tactical computers had anticipated this adaptation, and the fleet's response was swift and decisive. Target the bioship at coordinates 77 Alpha, Rivera ordered. That's their formation leader. The combined fire of 12 human dreadnoughts focused on a single enemy vessel, overwhelming its defenses and tearing through its hull in a matter of seconds. The destruction of the command ship sent ripples of confusion through the Kythera formation, as individual bioships lost coordination with the collective intelligence that guided their actions. Admiral Carter's voice came through the communication system again. All ships, enemy reinforcements detected emerging from the outer system. Prepare for Phase 2 of the operation. Rivera looked at his tactical display and saw new contacts appearing on the edge of the sensor range. The Kythera were bringing in their reserve forces, including some of the largest bioships in their fleet. These were ancient vessels that had grown to enormous size over centuries of warfare, each one capable of deploying swarms of smaller attack craft. "Captain," Foster called from her communication station, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. They're requesting terms for surrender." The bridge fell silent for a moment as everyone processed this unexpected development. In less than 30 minutes of combat, the Kythera home defense fleet had been reduced from over 400 ships to fewer than 100 operational vessels. Rivera considered the request carefully. The human fleet had achieved their primary objective of demonstrating overwhelming superiority. But the real message was intended for the Council members who were undoubtedly monitoring the battle from their safe positions in the inner systems. "Open a channel to the enemy commander," he decided. The main screen flickered to show the insectoid face of a Kythera war leader, her compound eyes reflecting the fires that burned throughout her damaged bioship. "Human commander," she said through the translation system, "we did not expect such resistance. Our species has fought many wars, but never against tactics like these." Rivera nodded respectfully. The Kythera were warriors, and he could respect their courage even while defeating them. "War leader, your ships fought bravely. We offer safe passage for your surviving vessels to withdraw from this system." The alien's mandibles clicked in what Rivera had learned was an expression of confusion. "You do not seek to destroy us completely? To claim our breeding worlds as conquest?" "We seek only to defend our independence," Rivera replied. "Withdraw your forces and no more of your people need to die." The Kythera war leader considered this offer for a long moment before responding. "Human commander, we will remember this day. Your species fights unlike any we have encountered." As the surviving bioships began their withdrawal, Admiral Carter's voice came through the fleet channel one final time. "All ship." 6 months after the first shots were fired in what historians would later call the Independence War, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new reality. The Galactic Council chambers on Prime World, once a place of absolute authority where the fate of entire species was decided without question, now hosted very different kinds of conversations. The air itself seemed different, charged with uncertainty and the recognition that the old order had changed forever. Ambassador Rachel Torres walked through the massive entrance doors of the council chamber with quiet confidence, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors that had witnessed 1,000 years of alien diplomacy. Behind her walked a small but significant delegation, Dr. Vincent Cole, whose understanding of alien psychology had proved crucial during the conflict, and General Paul Wright, whose strategic planning had helped humanity achieve victory after victory against supposedly superior forces. The alien delegates watched the human party with expressions that mixed respect, wariness, and something that might have been fear. The war had cost the Council dearly, not just in ships and personnel, but in their fundamental understanding of how galactic politics worked. For centuries, they had been the ones who decided which species deserved protection and which deserved independence. Now they found themselves in the unfamiliar position of being the ones who needed to ask for terms. Prime Minister Zek Thanor stood at his traditional position at the head of the Great Table. but his crystalline form seemed somehow diminished. The patterns of light that normally danced through his transparent body were muted, reflecting the diminished confidence of his entire species. The Veltar Empire had lost 3 major fleets in the war, including their pride and glory, the core defense force that had protected their homeworlds for over 5 centuries. The Council recognizes Ambassador Torres of the Human Federation, Zekthanor announced, his voice still carrying authority, but lacking the absolute certainty that had characterized his words just months before. Torres approached the central podium, the same spot where Captain Morrison had stood when he rejected the Council's original offer. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. Where once humanity had been offered protection and supervision, now they were being invited to participate as equals in the governance of galactic civilization. Honored delegates, Torres began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. 6 months ago, this council offered humanity protection from the dangers of the galaxy. Today we offer you something that we believe will be far more valuable: partnership. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Partnership implied equality, mutual benefit, and shared responsibility. It was a concept that the Council had never seriously considered when dealing with younger species. Hive Queen Lixandra was the first to respond, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays that showed the current state of galactic affairs. The Cathara Collective had suffered the heaviest losses during the war, with their home defense fleets reduced to a fraction of their original strength. Ambassador Torres, she said through the translation system, what specific terms does humanity propose for this partnership? Torres gestured to Dr. Cole, who activated a holographic display that showed a detailed proposal for galactic reorganization. The plan was comprehensive but fair, addressing the concerns of all species while establishing humanity as a major power with the right to independent action. We propose a mutual recognition treaty that acknowledges the sovereignty of all major spacefaring civilizations, Torres explained. Each species would maintain control over their home territories while participating in a new galactic congress that makes decisions through consensus rather than decree. The proposal was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of the hierarchical system that had governed the galaxy for millennia, humanity was suggesting a confederation of equals, where no single species or alliance could dominate the others. Ambassador Wispatel's gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated deep thought. The Etherian Commonwealth had perhaps suffered the least during the war, but they had also learned the most about humanity's capabilities. And what of military matters? He asked. The Council's fleets have traditionally maintained galactic peace through strength and unity. General Wright stepped forward to address this concern. Each member species would maintain their own defense forces while contributing to a joint peacekeeping organization. No species would be required to disarm, but aggressive expansion would be prohibited. The genius of the proposal was that it addressed the fundamental issue that had led to the war in the first place. Humanity had never objected to galactic cooperation or even galactic government. What they had objected to was being forced into submission by species who believed that their age and experience gave them the right to rule over younger civilizations. Prime Minister Zekthanor studied the proposal carefully, his crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated intense consideration. Ambassador Torres, this proposal would fundamentally alter the structure of galactic civilization. The Council has maintained stability for over 3,000 years. Stability through dominance is not true stability, Torres replied. It is simply organized stagnation. The galaxy is vast enough and rich enough to support multiple centers of power and innovation. Dr. Cole activated another section of the display, showing the technological and cultural exchanges that could result from true cooperation between species. Humanity offers our medical advances, our agricultural techniques, our defensive technologies, and our industrial methods. In return, we seek access to your knowledge of physics, your understanding of exotic matter, and your experience with galactic-scale logistics. The offer was generous but also strategic. Humanity had demonstrated that they could take what they wanted through military force, but they were choosing instead to offer mutual benefit. The message was clear. Cooperation would be more profitable for everyone than continued conflict. Hive Queen Lixandra leaned forward, her multiple arms gesturing in patterns that expressed cautious interest. What guarantee do we have that humanity will honor these agreements? Your species has proven to be remarkably skilled at deception and long-term planning. Torres smiled, and somehow that expression had lost the threatening edge it had carried during the war. Your Majesty, our deception was necessary only because the Council refused to treat us as equals. Once that changes, there will be no need for secrecy or misdirection. The chamber filled with the sounds of multiple species communicating among themselves in their various languages and methods. The Veltar delegates chimed softly as they discussed the proposal through harmonic frequencies. The Cathara representatives chittered rapidly as they shared thoughts through their collective consciousness. The Etherian delegation swirled in complex patterns that represented their electromagnetic debate process. Ambassador Wisptel was the first to speak for his species. The Etherian Commonwealth finds these terms acceptable in principle, but we request detailed negotiations on the specifics of technology sharing and territorial boundaries. Hive Queen Lixandra nodded her agreement. The Kithera Collective is willing to consider this new arrangement, provided that our breeding worlds remain under our exclusive control. All eyes turned to Prime Minister Zekthanor, whose decision would largely determine whether the other council species would accept humanity's proposal. The Veltar Empire controlled the largest trade networks and commanded the most respect among the older civilizations. The Veltar Empire requires time to consider these proposals in detail, he said finally. However, we acknowledge that the previous system has proven inadequate for managing a galaxy that includes species as capable as humanity. Torres nodded graciously. Of course, Prime Minister. However, I should mention that with or without Council approval, humanity will continue to expand our presence in the galaxy. We prefer to do so as partners and allies, but we will not be prevented from claiming our place among the stars. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Humanity had proven that they could take whatever they wanted through military force. The choice facing the Council was whether they wanted to be partners in shaping the future, or obstacles to be overcome. Over the following months, negotiations continued in earnest. Trade agreements were signed that opened new markets and opportunities for all species. Embassy exchanges were established that allowed for direct communication between civilizations that had previously only interacted through Council intermediaries. Research partnerships were formed that accelerated technological development across the galaxy. Most importantly, humanity took its place not as a protected species under Council supervision, but as an equal power in galactic affairs. The Council learned to share authority with a species that brought new perspectives and capabilities to the ancient problems of managing a vast interstellar civilization. The galaxy had braced for war when humanity walked away from the original negotiations. What they received instead was something far more valuable. A partner who had refused to be intimidated, who had spent decades preparing for exactly this moment, and who had proven that sometimes the strongest position is the willingness to say no to a bad deal. In the end, humanity did not conquer the galaxy through military might alone.